few months ago, I bought the Sennheiser Momentum 4. I thought, I like Sennheiser's headphones. Mixed feelings about some of them, but they're a legendary brand and a name people know for a reason. Why have I never tried their wireless headphones? So I waited for a sale and I bought the Momentum 4. And I was disappointed. So I don't want to talk about the Momentum 4 today, but I do want to talk about the product that is maybe what I wanted the Momentum 4 to be. And that would be the HDB 630. This is a first for Sennheiser. It's a first wireless headphone that they have given the HD moniker to. And not only that, they've called it the 630. They've put it in the 600 line of headphones, along with the 600, the 650, the 6XX from Drop. Headphones people talk about, debate, people love them, people hate them. And now we have a wireless headphone. So, let's talk about it. What you get in the box is a very thick case with a somewhat stiff zipper. Looks like it's cooperating right now, but sometimes I have some issues with it. When you open that up, it is a very nice case in that it has room for everything. You have room for the airplane adapter, room for the auxiliary cord, the dongle, which I'll talk about, and of course the headphones themselves and USB cable. So, this is a wireless headphone, of course. It supports aptX Adaptive, has a high sample rate. Not that that is super relevant to sound quality, but it internally works at 96 kilohertz. The reason I was disappointed in the Momentum 4, there's a couple things. One was sound. There's a ton of bass. It sounds a lot like you would expect, like a Sony XM5 or, a Bose wireless headphone. It sounds a lot like you expect those products to sound like. And coming from Sennheiser, a brand known for their well-regarded headphones, it's just a little bit odd to me. There's limited EQ functionality, so you can take the bass down, and I did that immediately. And, once you tone the bass down, the Momentum 4 sounds okay. I don't think the Momentum 4 is a bad headphone. But it's not a great one, and I felt like Sennheiser could do better. One of the things that I thought they could do better was the fit, the finish, the comfort. I had a lot of issues with the Momentum 4, with the pads, which are, not super small. They're pretty decent for a wireless headphone, but they're not big enough for my ears, so the back of my ears do touch the pads, and that is an issue, and it's an issue on this as well. But they are using a different material. This is protein leather. It is super soft. It is super plush. And for whatever reason, I do find the comfort significantly improved on the HDB 630 compared to the Momentum 4. The Momentum 4 had an issue where, ironically for Sennheiser, it has very little clamp, and so it would constantly shift around on my head. And the problem with that is that I mean, it's annoying for one thing, but it would also break the ANC. I haven't had that issue with this. So I believe, while the dimensions are basically the same, I believe the pads are a little bit deeper. And so that and some other just subtle changes may have made a big difference for how it fits on my head personally, which is, it's quite nice for the first 30-40 minutes. It's only after a little bit of time that it becomes an issue. This will be a sound quality focused review. If you want to hear about, functionality, features, ANC performance, I would recommend someone like Sound Guys. They do rigorous testing of that kind of sort, and it'll be better than anyone's subjective impressions. But for sound quality, I thought I would do a little test. I wanted to take a different headphone into work for 3 days and just see how I felt about each headphone in the real world. So the first headphone I did that with was the HDB 630. And how did I feel about it? I felt pretty good. So let's talk about sound. These have quite a bit of bass still. It's nothing like the amount of bass that the Momentum 4 has, but it is still more bass than I would consider neutral. And the bass level rises into the sub bass, so it's not flat like you might get with like a Hyphaman planar or an Odyssey or something. And you notice the amount of sub bass. I find it quite pleasant. I didn't turn it down, which I immediately turned the Momentum 4 down, but it is quite a lot of bass, and I would say it has a firm presence. It sounds sort of warm and rich. It doesn't have super great texture, and I wouldn't say that it sounds speedy. I think that's something you get more with like a flatter bass response than this, but it sounds rich, and it's a really nice presentation. The mid-range, I think, is really where Sennheiser hangs their hat, and it's really what they nail on the HDB 630. This has a really nicely tuned mid-range with good timbre. There's really not much to complain about it. It's a little bit overemphasized at around 3K for me, but I'm sensitive in that area, so I often EQ that down a little bit, and I did with this. Other than that, I didn't make any changes. The treble is detailed. It sounds present. It doesn't sound withdrawn, but it also never really sounded sibilant, which is pretty rare. I put on some tracks that I know are quite sibilant on other headphones, and I even did some direct comparisons, and if you get a really sibilant track, you can hear the sibilance on the HDB 630. You can hear that the track is sibilant, but the way the treble is presented here is such that it's really not harsh in the way that it would be on a lot of other headphones. So the treble is quite nice. The headphone doesn't sound dark. I didn't want to look at measurements, but I have seen some measurements, and there is a recess, maybe around 8 to 10K, just from memory. And I do think that it's not the most detailed headphone. Like if you talk about like transient response and like hearing really fine details in the treble, it's not incredible, but it doesn't sound deficient really. So one thing I noticed is like cymbal hits can sound really splashy and over exaggerated on other headphones, and on the HDB 630 it's a little bit on the other side of that. So cymbal hits can sound just a little bit dull and lack just a little bit of detail and texture, but it's a really minor thing, and this tuning is so good that it's hard to find a lot of fault with it. So I think you can tell I'm quite fond of the HDB 630. But we have to talk about other headphones. So day 2. Day 2, I use the Focal Azurys. That is a close-back headphone. I believe it retails for $600. And, you know, it's a passive headphone. It doesn't have active noise canceling. It doesn't have any of those features. I would say it probably sounds a little bit more punchy, more dynamic than the HDB 630, though this has a decent sense of punch. It's, you know, it's enough that it doesn't sound unexciting. And I would say the Azurys soundstage on some tracks sounded a little bit more natural. Most closebacks don't tend to have a ton of soundstage, in my experience. And the HDB 630 doesn't have much of a sense of spaciousness. It does sort of feel like it has some layering, and like, you know, you listen to atmospheric tracks and you do feel like a sense of the atmosphere. Not really soundstage width, but you get some depth. And I thought the Azurys sounded a little bit better in terms of soundstage, but frankly, the timbre's way better on the HDB 630. The treble's way better. The Azurys gets really shimmery and like unnaturally artificial sounding. So it's a headphone where like you might get cymbal hits and they sound like compressed and like digitally. And the HDB 630 is way better in that regard. So if I would have had this on that day, I would have switched to this. This will be the main comparison point for the video. So a couple months ago, I purchased the Nothing Headphone 1 from Nothing. Company you may have heard of. They're a little bit niche, but I feel like if you're watching this video, you probably have heard of Nothing. And the most striking thing about them is not how they sound, it's how they look. I'll be honest, that's probably a big part of why I bought them. They don't sound bad. They have the advantage of being, along with the HDB 630, one of the only wireless active noise canceling headphones that don't sound like super bassy. These have plenty of bass. They have a little bit more bass than the HDB 630, but it's not absurd. And the tuning isn't too bad either. It sounds a little bit agitated sounding, you know, almost like you just sort of randomly move some EQ sliders up and down. Like it doesn't sound quite natural. It sounds a little bit flat. I wanted to make some direct comparisons between the Nothing Headphone 1 and the HDB 630. I directly compared 4 or 5 tracks, but I thought 2 sort of stood out, so I'll just have some notes on those 2. So I started with the HDB 630. On Crude Drawing of an Angel by Carolyn Polachek. The vocals come through clearly without being sharp on the HDB 630. There's detail, there's texture. You can actually hear Carolyn's breath at the end of lines. It's a really nice presentation. This is a really moody, atmospheric track with sort of weird production. And a lot of the effects in this song sort of seem to emanate from the side. And like I said, you know, not really a wide soundstage, but you do get a little bit to the sides and you get some layering. So it sounded great on these headphones. Switch over to the Nothing. And immediately the first thing you'll notice is the bass is louder. And it's a little boomy even. It's not too bad. It's nothing super objectionable, but it's the first thing you notice. The vocals sound echoey and a little bit dark, you know, which is weird because Carolyn Polachek has this really bright, lively voice that really cuts through the mix. So to hear it sound dark is very jarring, particularly when you've just compared it to the HDB 630. And overall, the presentation on the Nothing Headphone 1 is just a little bit stifled sounding. It's not bad. I enjoyed the track on both headphones, but there's not much question about which one is better. Second track. On Oblivion by Nora En Pure. I actually started listening to this on the Nothing, and it immediately sounded pretty bad, and I switched over to the HDB 630. This is an electronic track. Like the previous track, it's very atmospheric. It's maybe even more atmospheric. There's lots of synths, there's vocals, it's heavily processed. And the atmosphere on the HDB 630, it's just dripping with atmosphere. It sounds really good. And more so than on the Carolyn Polachek track, I don't think it sounded so great with the Nothing Headphone 1. Like, you go from the HDB 630 to the Nothing Headphone 1, and it's like you go from feeling like there's depth and there's separation to the sounds and there's tonal balance. And on the Nothing Headphone 1, nothing sounds like super obviously off to me with some EQ, but it just sort of sounds flat. I honestly think, by itself or compared to a lot of other headphones, the Nothing Headphone 1 sounds pretty decent. I think you could compare it against Bose and Sony headphones out of the box without EQ, and you would get some people to prefer this. Really not competitive with the HDB 630. So, how do I feel about this headphone? I think it's pretty clear that I like it. I think it's really good. It was an interesting experience. I've never got to hear a headphone before launch before. So it was interesting to have my own impressions and opinions without having seen reviews. And I avoided watching reviews while I was writing the script and filming this video because I didn't want to say or not say something based on what other people on the internet were talking about. But, I'm not oblivious. I've seen the thumbnails. I've seen the titles of YouTube videos. I've seen that people seem to really like this headphone, and I'm not surprised by that. I did go through a journey having it for 2 or 3 weeks where, I started to see reviews, just the thumbnails, and I'm like, is it that good? Is it getting overhyped? Because, I'm in a unique position of already having heard them. And, my conclusion was pretty much like, no, I think they're really good. I don't think they're, the end of the world. I don't think they beat, like, a lot of really nice wired headphones. But I can't really deny that they seem like something of a standard setter going forward for wireless active noise canceling headphones. And really, the only thing I have to say is that I wish they weren't $500. I don't think it's super unreasonable. I think, the XM6 might be $600. I would have to look it up. Headphone prices are going up, and these sound a lot better than I imagine the HM6 sound. I haven't heard them. I've heard the XM5 and stuff like that. But if these were $300, I would probably buy these myself. I might buy these for my girlfriend. I would talk to anyone who would listen, because I just think they sound so much better than what most people probably use. They sound better than a lot of headphones I have. But $500 is a little steep. So that does have to be considered. The Nothing is an okay option. They retail for $300. I got them for less on sale. I can't say I'm not a little bit less excited about using them now that I've heard the HDB 630. If you care about sound quality and you want like a work headphone, I think this would be my pick. You know, there was some hype around these Azurys last year, and I eventually picked it up because I'm in the office, I'm spending a lot of time there. I wasn't really happy with the closed back headphones I had to use. And the Azurys is okay, I like it. You can sort of fix some of the timbre problems with EQ, but I like this better. You know, somewhat unique. The kind of wireless headphone that can beat both competing passive options and digital options. So it's a unique headphone. Very happy to have heard it. It will be a shame to send it back, but so it goes. With that, thanks for watching. I hate to be this person, but this is a new channel. This is my first video. If you think there should be more headphone and audio content on YouTube, please consider liking and subscribing. I will be producing videos about the new headphone D1 that's getting a lot of hype. I'm waiting for my order to ship. I want to do content about the Para 2, which hasn't gotten a lot of reviews. So I should have a lot of stuff coming up. Hopefully videos every couple weeks. And with that, I'm out. See ya.